Hey, everybody. Today on the Tonic Accord, we have a very special guest, and I'm excited to announce that we are going to be talking to Madeline Quasebarth. I'm excited to talk to her because we actually worked together with the Africa Center for Strategic Progress. And she, I think a couple weeks ago, wrote a paper that I just found really interesting on the Pfizer vaccine, Guinea inequality, and just kind of the dynamics of global commerce and economics. And so today I wanted to bring her on to talk about it more. She is a Baltimore, Maryland native and a recent graduate, from the University of Chicago. She has a master's in social sciences, and she currently works for the Chicago Center for HIV Elimination, and again, the Africa Center for Strategic Progress. She is passionate about economic, racial, and reproductive justice, and she volunteers as a case manager for the Chicago Abortion Fund. Madeline, it sounds like you are definitely busy, so good for you. And how's everything going? Are you staying sane during these strange times?
I'm trying. Thank you for having me on the show. Trying to take day by day, not listen to the news too much or too little, hit a nice balance to keep my sanity.
Yeah, I think that's all you can really do now. I've been trying to do news detoxes lately, where there's some days I just try to just completely shut it off, watch a rom-com or something, and just disconnect a little bit. But
exactly.
Your paper I really found interesting. So I don't know if you maybe just wanted to kind of give our listeners a background on what you wrote about and why maybe I found it interesting, and maybe it's something to share, just because I don't think a lot of our listeners, I know I wasn't aware of this, so I'm sure a lot of other people aren't as well.
Sure, yeah, of course. So broadly speaking, this paper was kind of examining how we can reconceptualize pathways to valuing lives and how they relate to the harvesting of raw materials. More specifically, it was a paper looking at bauxite mining in Guinea and a mine called the Singredi mine, which is located in Guinea. And how that mining has been used and co-opted by different types of policies, largely neoliberalism, and how that affects the Pfizer vaccine distribution. As you guys know, I'm sure as your listeners know, the Pfizer vaccine is rolled out, which is exciting, but it needs an ultra freezer for it to be stored, and that causes a lot of problems when it comes to the vial that the vaccine needs to be stored in. A lot of problems involving microfracturing. So Pfizer made an agreement with a glass company called the Corian Glass Company, which is a really large glass company. We all probably use their products. They make a lot of phone screens and things like that. So Corian came up with a thing called the Valor vial, which is a specific vial that takes, instead of using boron, which is what's usually used in a vial, it has substituted boron out for aluminum, and aluminum comes from bauxite. So Corian gets its aluminum from the Alico mining company. And Alico is the parent company of the CBG, or the Compagnie des Bauxites Guinea, which is the main government-owned bauxite company in Guinea. And they harvest the bauxite from the Singredi mines. Currently, the Singredi mines are, I don't think under investigation is the right term, but there's been a lot of human rights discussion around it, as a lot of the miners and the people living around the mine have suffered from different types of respiratory illnesses, as well as a lack of resources. And there's a discussion that those who are profiting off of the mine and the material are not actually really giving anything back to the community. So it's there's kind of a morose poeticism to it, in which the people who are mining and getting this resource that's going to be instrumental in rolling out the Pfizer vaccine are doing it at the cost of their ability to breathe, in order for people who are living in economically developed countries to breathe much easier. Because in reality, the Pfizer vaccine is probably not going to ever make it to people living near the Singredi mines. Just infrastructurally, it's not possible.
I had a quick question. So bauxite is associated with the new Pfizer vaccine, but the mining of bauxite in this area is not new, right? Bauxite mining has happened in Guinea for a while.
Yeah, bauxite's been happening really since they found the mine. But the main issue was in the 1980s when neoliberalism first kind of like hit the world. In order for Guinea to contribute to the global economy, they agreed to structural readjustments by the IMF and the World Bank. And this caused Guinea to no longer be able to tax their bauxite. So people usually get, or companies, countries get the most money when they do, what is that called? Basically when they make bauxite into alumina. And so it's more beneficial for a country to have that process happen within that country in order to sell it at a higher rate. And so before 1980, Guinea was putting a really high tax of 13 USD on any bauxite that was exported out of Guinea as a raw material in order to try to get countries to use their facilities to make it into alumina. When they signed on with the structural readjustment with the IMF and the World Bank, part of the agreement to make them more like friendly to global trade networks was to drop that tax. So now Guinea no longer has any facilities that can make bauxite into alumina within the country. So they've lost a ton of revenue.
Oof.
And who are some of their competitors? Because just from my like very basic top of the iceberg research, it looks like Guinea is up against some big giants as far as who actually mines bauxite, which is Australia, China, Brazil, and India.
I think it's hard to break it down as like their competitors country-wise because I don't even think Guinea is actually a competitor. I think that the companies that are in charge of the mining in Guinea are competitors. So we have like Alicon, Halco, Rio Tinto, and then you have now quite a few Chinese companies coming in to also mine in Guinea. And yeah, so you see Alico technically has 2 mines they control in Australia and Brazil. Everything else, they just have like vested interest in it. And they're not in charge of like the operational maintenance of it. But yeah, mainly it is these American companies, Chinese companies, and Russian companies that are mining bauxite across the world.
Wow.
Always lovely. Jeez.
Yeah, the 3 best powers.
I read a little bit into that Human Rights Watch article that you mentioned that was published back in 2017, and it talks about just the physical, mental, and economic hardships of the people, and it's really sad to me because I feel like it's just this continuous trend is that a lot of the developing world is just kind of used by the wealthy world as kind of a trash heap. Like they just kind of feel like there's no accountability for what they put out, and. But I did see that in 2015, the president of Guinea, who's Alpha, Conde, received a $135 million loan from the IFC. And this did violate numerous IFC standards. Like, do you think there's something more nefarious on just like a global level? Or do you think there should be some accountability in local leadership? I don't know. It's kind of a really open question. But do you think there should be accountability on the local level as well? Or these people maybe just need the money?
I think it's really complicated. One, I think there's definitely something more nefarious going on. For example, the president of Guinea, Alpha Conde, just won another re-election in, I think it was October, November of 2020. And he just won his 3rd term, which is against the Constitution. However, he was able to keep his position because Xi Jinping, the president of China, endorsed it. And they have a lot of mines. They make a lot of money from bauxite. So they had a lot of vested interest in keeping Guinea peaceful and easy to mine. So in that way, I do think these like nefarious powers make it really difficult for like on the ground grassroots people to actually change things. At the same time, I wouldn't want to cancel out anyone's autonomy or like ability to change anything. I'm not Guinean. I don't live in a mine. I don't live near a mine. So I don't know what kind of more personal on the ground things you can do on a local level that could actually change what's happening. And I think it also depends when we're talking about change and like reform. Are we talking about reform of people's everyday life? Or are we talking about systemic global reform? Because I think both of these will result in different types of actions.
Right. Right. I mean, sorry, Drew, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I just wanted to go on like on the local people's reactions to this. It seems like this issue goes back at least a decade. I saw a video on YouTube from 2008 from a French newsreel that had talked about miners in this town. I forget the name. It starts with an S. You had mentioned it.
Singaretti. I don't actually know how to pronounce it. But
Yeah, that's us Americans. But Singaretti. That they had been they were concerned about the dust storms kicked up from the mining activities, leading to bad health quality. And this was in 2008, as well as, one of the miners said he got sick and the company refused to pay for his medical treatment. And then I also heard that around 2017 and 2018, there was a series of riots where, local people set up checkpoints and tried to halt mining activities. Yet, obviously, still today, we're seeing, the bauxite mining continue. So I'm wondering, like, what are the avenues for these people to take? Because it seems like to me, it seems from an outsider, an uneducated outsider, it seems like that the local government is not actually representing its people. Of course, the international companies are not looking out for the local people. And even things like, full on rioting has failed.
Yeah, I think that's a really tough question when it comes to the idea of reform. I think you can see a lot of policies that are rooted in reform and are like allegedly rooted on social equity are often really just a way to kind of maintain peace and like however you want to define it. But I think really the best way to go about this, if we're going to agree that we live in a globalized world, that what is happening in Sangretti, what is happening in Guinea is deeply affecting me. For example, I got the Pfizer vaccine a few weeks ago, and the vaccine that went in my arm, the vial that was used was the Valor vial, which was used by Bauxite. So if we want to agree that we're all in this like collectiveness, then I think it has to come with more of a collective consciousness and a change in consciousness on a global level. That can go with consumer ethics. It can go with boycotting. I don't really believe that power that we need to see change is going to come from governmental institutes or corporate institutes.
Okay.
They might, but I think that's usually a little bit harder because you always have to have some a little bit more on the extreme pushing to have any type of change.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, on that, not that I disagree with you at all, because I think this is a serious problem, but I love to play devil's advocate, as Drew I'm sure could tell you. But I've read a lot about this, and I've written a little bit about myself. But in terms of COVID impact, Africa, in terms of death, has been impacted less than other regions like Asia, Europe, the Americas. You know what I mean? And obviously, there's going to probably be worse economic ramifications in Africa due to COVID over the long term. So I really can't comment on that yet, just because we just haven't seen it yet. But at the same time, I'm like, wouldn't it be hard to have a public messaging to people collectively to do something about this when the vaccine is in such demand and need in a lot of these Western countries?
Yeah, well, I think first off, I don't know if I completely buy that there is less COVID death in Africa. If you look at testing and testing resources, there is just less resources going into Africa right now if we're talking about like overgeneralizing the continent. And so I don't know if I completely buy all the numbers, but yeah, I think what I'm arguing for is that I wish we could get to a point where we aren't playing a valuing of human lives, overvaluing one life and undervaluing the other. And I think comes with this pandemic and the vaccine, I don't really know. I don't have the right answer. And I don't think that we're going to be able to find the answer right now when it comes to bauxite. But I think if anything, this situation helps bring awareness to what's going on and helps bring awareness to how we can approach things in the future. Just because like this crosses so many things across like race, ethnicity, nationality, economic status, and like just basic human rights.
I think that's a good point. I noticed that it also, like, because again, I think this bauxite issue is rekindled because of the Pfizer vaccine being reliant on bauxite, or the glass used for the vials. It is. but again, that this idea of a nation that is resource rich, that feels that it doesn't necessarily see all the benefits of that, is nothing new. And it's even considered to be called something. I mean, again, I'm sure you guys know, but like the resource curse, or even the Dutch disease. And it's the idea of, and Alex and I have talked multiple times about countries like, Venezuela as being a sufferer of the Dutch disease, where, on paper they should be very wealthy with their oil reserves, and in reality they're not. And Guinea, for maybe very different reasons, is, I think, in that same place where bauxite, as well as I believe they have deposits of gold, iron ore, and diamond. I mean, you would think that this would promote a large-scale, social mobilization into a burgeoning middle class, and yet we're not seeing that. And I think that this Pfizer vaccine angle on top of it is even, I guess, highlighting more the inequity of who gets the benefits from these resources.
Yeah, I think it comes down to really like who is the stakeholder. In my mind, these policies all happened in the 1980s. It's all neocolonialism. A good way to control a country is by controlling their economy. And especially if the control is not happening from actual nation states, but actually happening from corporations, it allows nations to have more diplomatic avenues that are open. So I think it just depends, like, we as Americans, as economically developed countries, we profit off of making sure that certain countries are subjugated for our interests. So when it comes to things like inequity and the burden of having good resources, that's really just like having the burden of having the Western eye on you, at the cost of like the life of your citizens.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I feel like over the last maybe decade, maybe a little bit longer, I feel like we've seen a lack of public support for more neoliberal policies, but we've seen new forms of neocolonialism. Drew and I talk a lot about China and, the Belt and Road Initiative. And so to me, it gets really complicated because in some ways we've seen, these populist movements, this anti-globalist rhetoric that's growing around the world, which kind of tells me that people are fed up with neoliberal policies because it really has benefited corporations, but it's kind of hurt the little guy all around the world, But now I'm worried because we're seeing kind of a new form of this coming out of China, where it's state-ran corporations that have, the political might of the state, but also have the resources of a corporation. And now they're pretty much doing the same thing, but with actually the Chinese government solely backing them. So I'm really worried to see kind of if we're getting into almost a new era of neocolonialism.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are. I don't fully buy that it's not still a neoliberalistic endeavor. I think it's really difficult to define neoliberalism, which is why it has much power.
Right.
It's often just used kind of as an epithet for like left-leaning people, like liberals being like, get out of my country, you capitalists. But I think one of the ways to look at it is that we have neoliberalism is like broken into our social imaginary, meaning it's broken into what we can view as a possibility of the future. And so even within China, China culturally is a collective society. A lot of people would view themselves within a collectivism rather than the individualism of America. But still you see neoliberalistic ideology working into China. Through the ideas of like entrepreneurship and governance, not governance, basically just making money. I was reading something by Dong Xiaoping. Shoot, I forgot his name. He was like the previous one of the party leaders of China. He was like the architect of modern China.
Right.
Dong Xiaoping. And
I have trouble with that name.
Yeah, back to me being an ignorant American. But basically, he said to get rich is glorious, which I think is just kind of demonstrates that neoliberalism has really woven itself into the social imaginary of our whole globe. So I don't think neoliberalism is really done. I think maybe it looks a little bit different. But I think China is maybe doing like an authoritative version of neoliberalism. but it's still very much part of neocolonialism. That being said, I don't know if it's time to come up with a new term to talk about what is happening now in economically developing countries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one could argue that maybe it's an evolution of neoliberalism, which almost throws out kind of the multinational corporation in exchange for the kind of Chinese state, which I think could have its own Frankenstein type of monster come out of it. And it scares me just because, I mean, you look at some of these infrastructure projects in, the east coast of Africa, and I mean, they're not building up the economies either. They're, bringing in Chinese work or other corporations, other countries, doing the same. They're bringing in, they're outsourcing their labor. So it's not really a trickle down assistance to the actual people living there either, So it's kind of like take the benefits and don't help the populations that live there.
Exactly. You can see that, and also in like South and Central America too. Same thing happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked a little bit about on a different episode about like actually exotic animal trade, how a ton of Chinese workers in South American jungles are like basically stealing tiger claws and teeth and stuff to take back to China. And it's this whole, it's a small problem that's a reflection of a larger grand issue of like, the fringes of globalization and how it's cracking some societies. Different topic though. I did want to get your idea of like, obviously this is super complex. I'm not asking you to just solve this here and now on this podcast, but for the sake of
I wish I could.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Come on.
If you could, you wouldn't be here. But for the sake of discussion, though, if you did have a magic wand, like what is something that you would change about the global structure that would avoid an issue where people are working so hard to develop a vaccine yet may never receive it themselves?
That's a question. I think in just a specific case, if we're looking at like just this in Gritty Mine and people living around there.
Sure.
Well, I think one, we'd have to talk about like what kind of vaccines are coming out. Logistically, the Pfizer vaccine is never going to get there. So I think the first step would be to make Guinea economically secure. So that'd be through allowing them to make bauxite into aluminum within their own country, because they'd make more money that way. And that give them more independence, which then allow them to demonstrate their like stakeholders within the global economy, thus demonstrating that they have like some type of right to life that being a stakeholder in the global economy now means. So I think it would be through more national lawmakers trying to kind of reclaim that power in corporations, but I also think it would really come from people like you and me, and us kind of getting educated about where we're getting our materials and our raw materials and understand the pathways that these materials are getting to us. Because I don't know about you guys, but almost everything I interact with on a daily basis is not the raw form in which it like came from the earth.
No.
Everything's been changed. Yeah.
Right.
So I think just us being cognizant of that is really the first step, and kind of like allowing us to kind of lift that veil of ignorance, and see where things are coming from, so we can figure out how we can best assist and provide action and create dialogue.
Do you almost think, and this is just pessimistic me, do you think it's almost like too late to a certain extent, because the world is so like kind of hooked on these imported products, and they're kind of hooked on this level and quality of life that maybe people are fine with complacency? I'm not saying everyone, but to me, I'm kind of bitter about real collective change, especially when the status quo is nice for a decent amount of people. And obviously I'm not trying to sound cold there, but because I am very willing to change habits, like specific habits to do that. But I feel like a lot of people aren't. And then there's other places that are developing and finally seeing growth. And I feel like it would be hard to kind of reverse that.
Yeah, I have a hard time. I feel like I go back and forth between kind of a nihilistic worldview of like, oh, everything sucks. But nihilism is a really good way to kind of roll over and allow these powers to take an effect. Simone de Beauvoir has like a really good passage she writes about in one of her books, The Ethics of Ambiguity, where she talks about nihilism and how that's a tool to allow kind of like the subman or the person who is subjugated. So like you and me, we're subjugated by corporations. And nihilism allows us to kind of view that and embrace that without actually deciding to make any change. So we have self-awareness without any like self-reflection and self-accountability. And so I think it really has to come from this idea that, yes, you and I on an individual basis really can't do that much, but we also have to understand that when we're together, we are very powerful. All these corporations, our government, they are nothing without us. We are the stakeholders when it comes down to it, and it's something that we can very easily forget. And it's something that those in power like us to forget. But if we kind of follow a Foucauldian idea of biopower and body politic, that power is going to be bouncing around no matter where it goes, right? And so we have the ability to bounce that power back to us. And through that way, we can ask and start to demand change. But it really just takes us to kind of, like first look hard in the mirror and be like, you know what, things I'm doing are really hurting people. And then to talk to people and build coalitions and create solidarity in order to try to change where that power is laying.
Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning that, for all the times that bauxite mining goes on unnoticed, there are other times where private enterprises do have to change their behavior because of public, reactions, right? I think it was, in the beauty industry when people started learning about the decimations of palm oil forests, there was a bunch of companies that said, hey, we're actually not going to source our lip balms from that palm oil anymore. And I actually even looked up the company that is involved in this bauxite mine. Now, might be a little bit disingenuous, but like there obviously is public pressure because I watched the ad from Alcoa Global Bauxite. I watched their like promo, and the last half of their promo, they didn't talk about their Guinea mine, but they talked about how they have the greenest mine in Australia and that they got a stamp of approval from some, group that the most sustainable mine, right? So. Again, sure that I'm not saying that that's enough. But my argument is that there obviously is public pressure on some of these countries, and maybe it's disingenuous or they just try and get a PR move. But I do feel that some of them have changed, and my argument is not that companies are like will do it on their own. My argument that it's proven that actual public outcry and political movement can actually alter the behavior of large companies.
I completely agree with that. Look at apartheid. That was a huge thing. Americans boycotting stuff, like Coca-Cola, deeply affected apartheid. The thing that I watched that ad as well. And the funny thing is that Alcoa technically is not the manager operator of the bauxite mine in Guinea.
Right.
So they don't have to include that. And they're very clear to say that on their website too. Cause I was really impressed at first. I'm like, oh wow, like they actually care. Like they care about the environment and the people. And I was like, oh, actually it's only for 2 of their mines. So I think it's kind of to have that critical eye on corporations, even as while we're like kind of pushing them and maybe they're becoming a little bit more ethical, staying critical and looking at what they're actually saying and trying to read between the lines is really important.
No, absolutely. But my point is those 2 mines where they're doing better is because they were held accountable. Whereas the Guinea one, because even though they own 51%, but the agreement allows that the Guinea is actually the operating manager, that they're not held accountable. And so it really is this like, look, when they're held to account, businesses will change. Disneyland, very unrelated to bauxite mining, but Disney had to like completely close whole parks. They even tried to do an America themed park in Virginia, but public outcry was so great that they canceled it. They stopped it. And so I think that just as kind of a reaction to the idea of the nihilistic idea of can we even really do anything? I would argue that an agreement with Madeline here is that when people do collectively bargain and get together, things can happen, but it doesn't mean it's not without difficulty.
Well, just to lighten the mood on this a little bit, back in July, the Goya Beans CEO praised Trump, and all of Trump's base just, flocked around buying Goya beans. So we saw just a mass mobilization of support for kind of just brand of beans, So if people can mobilize behind that, I would hope that people can mobilize around a bigger, more important issue. And I do think that people on a general basis do want to buy something that is good. I think there's a part of the brain that would just say, would I rather buy this that's ethically created or this that's not? And yeah, I think I need to work on being less of a nihilist, because sometimes you just go, boy, we're just screwed, but it's not a good way to be.
It's easy after a year like that, like we had, man. It's easy.
True.
That is very true. Yeah, I think it's also interesting to look, because you're talking about mobilizing behind, and I was talking about boycotting.
That's true.
See if there is a difference there, because I know a lot of people who boycotted Goya because of that, rather than mobilize behind it. But I don't know which one is the more powerful one. Is it getting people to do something or getting people to stop doing something? That's, I guess, another can of worms.
What a weird thing to rally behind, though, man.
That's the culture war, man.
Hey,
that's the
people pick strange heroes.
Yeah, they do. They do. Drew, I don't know if you have any more questions or thoughts. Madeline, I don't know if you do as well, but
yeah, I mean, I don't. I mean, I certainly learned a lot. One, reading your paper, which, by the way, when will that be publicly available so that people can know, or if you know?
It was like on the editorial cycle starting on January 11th, so it should be posted soon. I don't have the exact date though.
Okay. Well, we will, whenever that does happen, we will try to like edit the description to have a link to that. I definitely found it super fascinating. I mean, gosh, I didn't even know what bauxite was until I read this, and now I feel incredibly informed. So, yeah, is there anything you would like to add or discuss or caveat before we wrap this session up?
Thank you so much for having me on the show, guys. It was really great to talk to you.
Yeah, you as well. And I just applaud. I think when I read the paper, I just kind of applauded what you're trying to do and the message it's sending, because I just don't think our world can go on like this for humanitarian reasons, climate reasons. I mean, you can name a plethora of them. It's just I think we do need change, and I applaud that you're trying to do it. And I mean, just in the bio that I read at the beginning, I mean, just all the things you're doing. It sounds like you really care, and that's really cool to see.
Thank you. Trying to stay optimistic,
Hey, 2021, it's a new year. The glass is half full. Even though our last podcast episode.
First week.
yeah, I was gonna say maybe not after that last week. Well, thank you again, Madeline, and thank you all for watching. This was a fantastic episode of the Tonic Accord. And yes, so please be sure to catch this on YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcasts. If you do want to catch it live and maybe get harass us with comments, you can check us out on Twitch, as well as YouTube Live now. And with that, I think we will wrap this up. And once again, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you all for watching, and have a good day.
Thank you.